Man, how you doing?
Good. Doing well.
It's
Stuck inside, obviously, but it's been going well. Yeah.
it's been awesome to see the videos and the pictures of you enjoying the new climate
Oh,
there.
man. I love the new climate, man. I love the desert. I'm a desert creature for sure. I think the
Man,
humidity was 17% yesterday. It's like, yeah, I found my home. I love it.
that's so weird. I think I just experienced my first American desert when I was there last time in what's it called, Joshua Tree, and
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't imagine living out there. It was. I mean, Iceland is bare. We have a joke in Iceland that's, if you get lost in the forest, just stand up. And so, I'm used to bare landscape, but
Yeah.
man, that was
You got to get
something
used to it.
else.
Yeah, it's intense bareness. Yeah, it takes a while to get used to, and then you start to notice the blossoms and the flowers and some of the more subtle colors of the desert, especially in the spring. And so, yeah, it's an acquired taste for sure.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, so to everyone who doesn't know you, you're Tony Reinke.
Yep,
You're like the main guy in Desiring God, right?
that would be John Piper. Not to be
That's why they call the show Ask Pastor John.
That's
I
right.
always wondered who that John was because I was just like,
That's him. That's yeah.
his name's Ranky,
Stop it.
Tony Ranky.
Stop it. No, I'm just
uh,
one of a team here, and
yeah,
it's just we're a virtual ministry, so ministry continues on as normal for us. Really, we love to travel and get out and preach and stuff in front of local churches and at conferences. So that's been the big change. But otherwise, I mean, our writing, our articles, our podcasts, a lot of what we do is just as normal. So
yeah.
a lot hasn't changed for us.
Have you seen a spike in activity since this quarantine was basically introduced to half the world?
Yes and no. I mean, I haven't seen a huge spike in like our podcast listens and things because I think a lot of people listen to our podcasts during commutes. So I think
That's
there
true.
is, I think people are getting out and doing some walks and things like that, walking the dog and getting out in the neighborhood. But we have seen a spike in our articles, especially our articles on coronavirus, have done
Yeah,
really, really well.
yeah. I bet. I mean, you. I mean, the podcast is Ask Pastor John, and I think there's a lot of questions out there.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, is either underwhelmed responses of minimizing this thing or panic and there's almost, well, maybe it's just that the voices that are on the extreme ends of the spectrum
Yeah.
get the most attention, but it seems to lack a balanced view and a Christ-centric view as well.
Exactly. That's so key. I mean, we started to hear from listeners from Southeast Asia quite a while ago, about a month and a half ago, actually. So we were already getting coronavirus episodes long before it was an issue in Seattle and then in New York here in the States. So it was really interesting. Coronavirus was already on our radar because listeners in those countries were emailing us saying, "Hey, we're going to stop doing church. What do you think of that? Schools are going to be closed. How should we think about coronavirus?" So when we recorded our first episode on coronavirus, it was not an issue in the States at all. It was being downplayed. It's not going to get us. We've closed off travel to China, so our politicians were telling us it wasn't going to be a big issue here. So we were really addressing coronavirus from an international perspective of what can we say to churches in Southeast Asia? How can they love their neighbors in this? And really thought of it as an international story, but we were already talking about it long before it became a major headline in the States. So that's part of the interesting thing about having a global audience is you start to hear rumbles like this weeks and weeks in advance. So it was really fascinating to see this unfold. And now, of course, it's a huge issue for both of our countries.
Yeah.
But it's been a big issue globally for months now.
Yeah, it's such a surreal time to be alive.
It is,
It's
man. It really
something
is.
you never imagined experiencing. It's just strange, overall strange. But I feel like there could be some. Obviously, you're always looking at, okay, God works all things together for the good of those who are
Yes.
loved by Him and called by Him,
Yep.
and you're looking at things and you're like, okay, what is it in here that could be used for God's glory and the good of His
Hmm.
people? And I'm praying for my country as I think we in the West, when it comes to what we put our faith in, at least here in Scandinavia, it's the healthcare system, it's the social services, it's the government,
Yep.
it's this collective thinking, and you see what a tiny little rock needs to be thrown at this glass for it to shatter,
Oh man.
or at least show the possibility of just being overwhelmed. I mean, here in Iceland just last month, 14% of the, or 13.9% of the people applied, or of the working population applied for, unemployment benefits.
Wow.
And I think I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, what good is going to come out of this? And actually, I'm hoping that this will raise questions of, all right, what if this is so fragile? What is that out there that I can put my faith in?
Yes. Fragility is the word. I mean, in the United States, when we put so much of our faith and hope and trust in money, in the Dow Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dow Jones was getting close to 30,000. I mean, that we've never seen 30,000. So like the market had been going up and up and up. 401ks, retirement funds were at all-time highs. There was this sort of like implicit like arrogance, like we are the most powerful, wealthiest nation that's ever existed, and one little virus just boom, just sends shockwaves through the entire economic system. Healthcare is the same thing. We pride ourselves on being a healthy country. And so those two idols of, wellness and of wealth, I mean, those have gotten shaken so quickly. And you realize that those are unstable foundations. If that's where you're building your identity, your security, those things, man, they can be brushed aside with a little tiny virus from China. I mean, it's unbelievable. So yeah, fragility is the word of the season, man, and we're all feeling it. And I believe that God is working in each and every one of us to some end. And so it's amazing to see God work in so many lives around the globe at the same time in such a powerful way. But absolutely, I trust and believe that He is at work and doing some amazing things that will have eternal ramifications from something that may just have temporal implications.
Yeah, and I keep thinking of the church in Laodicea, especially having looked a little bit into the historical background of it, and the church of Laodicea kind of makes me think of the West. It was a very independent city. I think there was 3 earthquakes in a row that almost entirely destroyed the city, but they were proud people. They didn't accept help from the Romans, Roman sort of federal government, if you could put it that way. They were like, no, we're going to rebuild ourselves. And I mean, they imported water because there was no water there. And I just think of these verses in Revelation 3:17, for you say I'm rich, I've prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you're wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from the gold refined by fire so that you may be rich, and white garments so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. And this is what I'm looking at right now, and I'm thinking, man, it's like, I've always said this about Iceland. It's like, man, we are Laodicea. We think we can do it all by ourselves, but we don't realize we're naked.
Yeah.
We don't realize there's a tiny thing that needs to happen, and it all comes crumbling down.
Oh, man. Exactly.
So I'm looking at this, and I'm like, man, this is an opportunity for the church to step up and point to Christ. I'm also seeing a lot of danger. I'm seeing the statistics about porn usage in the world just skyrocketing because people are quarantined, and I'm thinking about the harms of just souls, of marriages, of just how sin erodes us. So I'm looking at this and seeing some positive implications and possibilities and hopefulness, and I'm praying for revival, but I'm seeing some of the negatives as well. And we had been talking for a little bit about you coming to Iceland, and well, you've been wanting to come to Iceland for a while. You just always find an excuse to avoid me for some reason.
No, I'm trying to find excuses to get to Iceland, man.
No, we were talking about doing a conference on how technology, or specifically your phone, is changing you. You wrote a book, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. You also wrote a book about technology in general, competing spectacles about, and this is, I think, a fitting time. This spectacle here with this coronavirus is capturing the attention of not just a local population, but around the world. Everyone is looking at the same thing. And you could compare it to a war, but most of the time, unless it's a world war, like only the U.S. has been focusing on the spectacle happening in Afghanistan or Iraq
Yep.
mostly, but here the entire world is looking at this one thing. I found this website called worldometers.info,
Yep.
and I've just been refreshing to see the latest numbers and the
Yep.
latest progressions, and it's almost like seeing a slow moving, like a train wreck
Hmm.
where the train just extends and extends and extends, and you're just seeing the next cart kind of
Yep.
fumble over the tracks. And so, man, that is a good book to read right now, Competing Spectacles
I appreciate
in this
that.
time.
Yeah, I mean, it what captures, you know, when you look at the statistics, that's one thing. When you see doctors bringing their phones into the ICUs and taking footage of people who are
Yeah.
sick with this virus, there are certain images that get sort of burned into the collective consciousness. And so this was true at 9/11. This was true, you know, there have been a number of things that have happened in the video age in which a certain event, a tragedy, is captured on film, and then it's repeated over and over and over, whether it's a jet slamming into a tower or those towers collapsing into a heap of dust. Like there's those things that capture collective imagination because they are fixed in a video spectacle. And that's what makes them especially powerful. And so what Competing Spectacles is about what do we as Christians do when we're living in this age in which everything is made ready for the eyes, and we're trying to live by faith. We're walking by faith and not by sight. So how do we navigate this world where we see these things that want to capture our attention, these fears that we see on the nightly news or these videos that we see from the front lines of this coronavirus war? They're very scary, and they can capture our attention and make it really hard to focus on God and His Word because we're distracted by these fears that are so potent because of how they're captured in moving video. And how they just pull us in, and it is like a big train wreck, and we've got to step away from that and look at eternal things, eternal promises that are unseen, and that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's hard to do in wartime. It's hard to do in peacetime, because if this was normal April for the United States, we would have basketball footage and highlights. We would have Major League Baseball footage and highlights. We would have ESPN going full steam ahead. We would have the movie industry would be full steam ahead. So we would have all these other spectacles. So it's not like this season it would be spectacle-less in any case, in any scenario. We're always going to have to deal with this this barrage of digital stimuli that come at us 24/7. Now with the smartphone in our pockets, we have a screen that never ends. It never dies. We can, with TikTok, you can watch TikTok videos 24/7, 365. They continue to come at you. As long as you want to feed yourself new TikTok videos, it's not going to end. And so what does it mean to be a spiritual, eternal being in a world that is so dominated by eye candy? And so that's really the tension that we feel. We feel it in wartime. We feel it in peacetime, because there's always going to be attention merchants trying to grab our attention and get us to, because if they grab our eyes, they get profits. If a politician grabs our eyes, they get votes. If pornographers get our eyes, they get our lust. If the movie industry gets our eyes and attention, they get our money. The gaming industry gets our eyes, they get our attention and wealth. So on and on, there's huge implications. All of these spectacles want something from us. It's not just this neutral sort of like, I'm just a passerby watching these things on my screen. Every image that comes at us wants something from us, wants to pull our fear out of us, our lust out of us, our wealth out of us. Every image wants something from us, our buy-in, our rejection, our approval, our retweet, whatever it is. And so we're trying to live in a world that's navigated by these attention merchants who have so much power over our collective consciousness and our collective gaze. And so what does it mean to be an eternal being living for an unseen realm, an unseen glory, while we're surrounded by all of these virtual and viral spectacles of this digital age?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting like that. I think we've gotten so used to products being free, and in this quote that if a product is free, you are the products that they're trying to sell you.
Right, exactly.
They're trying to sell you to the advertisers, and we don't realize that there's just people aren't out of the goodness of their hearts starting something like Facebook or Twitter or anything, or just any site, anything that's trying to
or
capture
a
our
YouTube
attention.
channel.
You are the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You are the thing
if a
being
YouTube
sold.
channel starts, they want to get as much eyes and attention as possible. So they want to convert my commodity of attention, and that becomes plays, that becomes views, that becomes subscribers, and then the YouTube channel uses those plays, views, subscribers to then generate the wealth that comes from advertising. And so, again, it's the collectivizing of the human attention. This is why Netflix has come out straight up and said our greatest enemy is not HBO, not some other streaming service, not Disney Plus. Netflix's greatest enemy is sleep. You can find it. They have tweeted this. Okay? So what they're trying to do is get us to have multiple screens open, to divide our attention, and to binge as late as possible into the night and lose as much sleep as possible, because that's how the attention merchants work, by compressing our sleep and getting more attention, more plays, more played minutes out of each consumer. And then that becomes a commodity of power that can be transferred into wealth. So that happens in YouTube channels. That happens for Netflix. I mean, all of these attention merchants are trying to accumulate as much attention as possible, because that's where the power is. That's where the money is.
Yeah, I mean, I think also just like entertain. I think I've been wondering, okay, why is it so difficult to talk to people about spiritual things here in Iceland? And I think, honestly, for the longest time, I've been thinking, well, I think it's the fact that, like you were saying earlier, like, where does Facebook end? If you keep scrolling, how long do you keep scrolling until there's just like, you're done with the material? Yep. I think we can confuse so easily entertainment to satisfaction. And as long as we can be entertained and distracted, we're never going to hear the screams of our souls for something more, that we were created for, more than, flipping through images with our fingers, but rather to be satisfied in God alone. And it's just interesting, because now we're at a time where there's great opportunity, but there's also a greater potential for people just to veg out on watching Netflix. And I loved what you said in your book as well, when you were talking about the gas attacks happening in Syria, I think it was. Mm-hmm. How there were, in one attack, 1,800 people that got killed because of the gas attack, and nothing happened, really. There was no retaliation. And then one other attack, a smaller attack, where I think it was 36 people died, but there was a picture of a young children dying with horrified looks on their face, and that caused the world to be horrified by what's going on. And I was thinking this here in the West, man, I think we've made death so clean, so exclusive, so shifted away. We're not used to walking around and seeing a bloated body that we have to bury somewhere.
Right.
That's for the professionals to take care of, in some basement, somewhere we don't see. Even funerals, we make the bodies look like they're alive still while we say goodbye. And I was thinking this when my son was having chemo. It's like, man, I feel like I never saw any kid with no hair, and here I am on the second floor at the Children's Hospital. Wow. And literally every room here has got kids in here with, and hearing about the kid that he played with 3 days ago is now gone, and just like, man, we don't realize this reality is going on. And I think the potential here is, man, with all these images coming out from the hospitals, from how dire the situation is. For instance, my dad is in Spain right now. I'm just looking at the numbers. And I'm just thinking, okay, 1,000 died there last night, and I think this might wake us up to the fact that death is a real thing. There is an end to this story of ours here on earth. And I think, man, we need to be proclaiming what Paul the Apostle did. Man, we are jars of clay, but we carry this immense treasure within us. And though our outer man is decaying away, man, our inner man, our spirit is being built up every day. And I'm like, man, okay, that's why I wanted to talk to you and record this, because I want to let people know in Iceland who you are. So when you finally get here, we can show them, this is the guy who's going to come talk. But also, you've written so much about this. Like almost all your books up until this point has been almost like great material for this. First, I don't even know how to pronounce this book. Lit. That's all I think of.
Lit. Lit! Exclamation point, man. Yeah.
It's a great book about reading. And I think, man, for the Christian church, we need to redeem the time that we have, the extra time, so that we can use it for eternal purposes. And that's a great book if you want to get on reading stuff. 12 ways your phone is changing you. What are some of the dangers that you see potentially for the church and for pastors in this? And what are some of the things that excite you? Because I've seen this meme going around where it says, your pastor in 2019, Facebook is of the devil. And then in 2020, join us for live services.
Exactly, man.
So you're basically a podcaster who hates technology, right?
No, I love technology. I am so positive for technology, I get into trouble. Seriously, I do this lecture of 4 or 5 lectures on a Christian take on technology, and I get criticized for being way too optimistic when it comes to technology. And I put a little theology of technology in the beginning of 12 ways. So 12 ways your phone is changing you. I do like a little 12-page, like here's how I view macro technology, genetic engineering, space travel. Like how should Christians think of this? And I'm now finally working on a book that's fleshing that out. And actually, the coronavirus has kind of sped that along because I've spent so much time at home. I've been able to get a lot of work done on it. It's going to be hopefully not too long of a book. It's about 50,000 words now, and I'm trying to keep it short, so maybe a couple hundred pages. But yeah, I'm very pro technology. I love technology. My Reinke lineage is a bunch of inventors. My grandfather got a Purple Heart for some machine that he made in World War II that would help planes sort of aim bombs and how, I don't know. I'm still trying to understand all the technology that he invented for the U.S. Air Force. But my dad was, very inventive, more blue collar inventive, but really cool. So I've been sort of part of a lineage of agricultural technology, and I've seen some really amazing changes over the years. But I love technology. I love digital technology. I love being on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, there's dangers all around. But I found this really fascinating quote from Jonathan Edwards in 1750, I think it was. He was talking about the mariner's compass. So he's like holding this compass in his hand. He's like, this thing has united continents. Like you just get in a boat from Iceland and look at this thing, and like you can hit other countries, right? And so he's looking at this mariner's compass, and he's like, this is going to unify the globe. And then he starts to riff on, I wonder if someday the global church will be able to talk in real time without being physically present in other continents. And then he leaves it at that. So he basically doesn't know. He's looking at this mariner's compass, and he's talking about this. He would absolutely flip if he saw what we're doing right now.
Man.
A believer in Phoenix and a believer in Reykjavik talking over Skype in real time on video. He would say, I saw this coming. I saw this coming. And so he was a post-millennialist, and this is why. He would say, see, post-millennialism is right, He would say, this is it. The kingdom has come, man. This is hashtag the kingdom is here. he would lose it, right? And we look at this technology and we're like, oh, it's probably of the devil, but we can use it. And like, no, that's not how people would have, so I'm trying to recapture this awe, not awe in technology itself, but awe in the technologies that the creator has made possible.
Yeah.
And so I've got whole lectures on what it means to be an inventor in this creation. But basically what it boils down to is that we have been given a sandbox, which is the created order, which is governed by natural laws. And we can only innovate within the parameters that God has set for us.
Yeah.
And he created all things out of nothing, which means he had no pattern. He had no copy. He was not plagiarizing anything. He everything that is patterned in this creation, in the cosmos, God patterned within himself. So when we look at the moon,
looking at that.
When we look at the moon, it's not, God wasn't saying, well, I've seen this before. I want to pattern something like what I've seen. Let's make a moon. No, everything was patterned within himself. And so when we talk about creating or making, all we're doing is following patterns that are existent within the creation, which means when you trace out the logic of this, the only reason we have a smartphone today, the only reason we have Skype today is because God put in the created order certain patterns that we would follow to eventually discover this.
Yeah. I mean, I remember looking at this, and I always remember this quote: the most dangerous guy with, the Greek or Hebrew language is the guy who thinks he knows it.
Yeah, right.
And so I remember, I just do basic word studies, and I remember looking at this word when God creates in the Old Testament in Genesis, and it's this Hebrew word bara that's used. And from what I understood from the word, it was this word that conveyed actual creation. There was nothing and now there's something. And you start looking at other words that you use to create in the Bible, and it actually conveys this more like not creation, but manipulation of what already exists. And it's amazing, man. I was just like, we need to marvel over the fact that, man, he's the only true creator. All we do is copy him after
all we can do
done.
is follow patterns of what exists. So if God did not want us to find atomic power, it would not exist in creation.
Yeah,
it's there.
And I mean,
so now we've got these grenades.
Image.
We've got these grenades that we're like kids playing with grenades. Okay. And like he puts these, what about opiates? What about marijuana? What about all of these powers that he has put latent within creation for us to discover? Think about all the oil that he put under creation using, biological material that was compressed quickly so that we could find it and use it at some point in the future. Now, that doesn't baptize all of our engines. It doesn't baptize all of our uses of technology, but he gets all the glory. If there's any glory to be had for technology, it's not us who just sort of like find the patterns within creation and follow them. It's the creator who put the patterns there because he patterned all of creation by himself. He's the one who gets all the glory. So when I go to Seattle and I'm in a room with like 50 incredible technology gurus who are in software and VR and video gaming industry, they're all believers, and I say, let's put God at the center of technology again, like this blows their mind. They've never heard anyone say like God is at the center of human technology. They've only heard him being on the periphery, of him not knowing what we're doing, of him sort of looking by passively at what we're creating, trying to squelch what we put together, a la Genesis 11:6, and that's it. And so there's a way different understanding of creation where we put the creator front and center in VR, gaming, Skype, atomic power, whatever it is you want to talk about, smartphones, he's there. He is not in the periphery. He's made those things possible for us to use for his glory. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, what can we use for his glory? What's beneficial? What's not beneficial? So if you game for 4 hours at night and you think that's going to satisfy me, you're going to wake up in the morning and realize it doesn't satisfy you. And if you're spiritually aware, you're going to start asking questions like, okay, why is there this hole that 4 hours of gaming couldn't fill? Because I wake up in the morning and I need more gaming. It didn't satisfy me. And so if you're spiritually dull, if you're spiritually dull, you're just going to keep going back to that broken cistern. You're going to do 4 more hours of gaming tonight and 4 more hours of gaming tomorrow. And you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to continue to chase this thing that doesn't actually satisfy me, but I'm going to keep chasing the promise of it. But for those who, when God's Spirit starts to work in your life, you start to realize, okay, I'm investing all this time in social media for self-glory or for lust or whatever reason it is. It's not satisfying me. Why? What does that say about me? That all the infinite scrolling media in the world will not satisfy me. What does that say about this cavern that's within me that's never satisfied? And so on the one hand, there's, when you look at Pascal, the mathematician, talking about, the reason why people won't sit quietly at home is because they're afraid of death. So they're in this frenetic, busy market looking for the theater to fill some gap that they have, looking for money to satisfy some gap that they have, because if they just stopped and stared at their ceiling in bed, they would be met with their mortality. I am finite. I'm going to die. What's after I die? What's next? And so for a lot of people, they're meeting that, but because we have so many, this glut of spectacles, we can distract ourselves. We can go back to TikTok, back to gaming, back to porn, back to the web, back to streaming services, whatever you want to satisfy yourself or to pursue in satisfying yourself. You can just shroud those questions about mortality. You can just snuff those out with a glut of digital entertainment. And that's what makes this season so dangerous, is that you can put aside those eternal thoughts and just drown them in distractions.
And this I've seen with my own eyes. Like I remember when we just started the church, I was working a full-time job while trying to start the church and having our first kid. And so life was pretty crazy. And I remember having friends of mine who were losing loved ones around them for the first time, and they were thinking about death and the point of life and all this. And I would get frantic phone calls. I remember two specific scenarios during that time where I was like, okay, I'm working right now, but I would love to, catch you after work or tomorrow and talk about this. Let's sit down and talk about this. 2 days later, they're like, you know what? Actually, I'm just back to work, and I think we're good. It's just a moment of weakness, and
Wow.
it was literally this. Man, we are, that book, Entertaining Ourselves to Death.
Yep.
But but it's like entertaining ourselves to eternal damnation, almost. Like we are so okay with just being entertained instead of satisfied, and
Yes.
it breaks my heart. But also, like, I love the fact, first of all, your book on 12 ways your phone is changing you. I thought it was going to be an informational dump because I know you had done a lot of research, and I was just expecting. I geek out over information.
Yeah.
I love this subject as well. Like I love Deep Work, another book about this, and it's beautifully written for a book. I remember sending you texts or something, Instagram messages like, man, this is really well written. I was not expecting it at all. But one of the great things that you did in there was to give me at least a sort of deeper thinking about what technology is. Like if you think about the church, and we can so easily demonize technology, but reality is we've all got Bible in our hands because of technology. Like technology, 500 years ago was the cause for, really the engine behind the Reformation and what made it possible for this new view of Scripture to go out. That we don't need another mediator. We don't need a pope. We don't need, a priest to mediate our prayers. We don't need to pray to Mary. We can read God's word on our own. This is all thanks to technology.
Yeah.
And I think I'm with you on the fact that we can demonize it. But on one end of the spectrum, you got people who are like, okay, right now, a lot of people are tied to their screen. They're locked into their screen, and how can we reach them? And on the other end of the spectrum, I understand the skepticism of people who may be scared for churches, that people will be like, well, it's kind of comfortable staying here at home watching a live service and just doing it this way and being a part of the church message group and all this type of stuff. I think I lean more towards the direction, at least in my own heart, man, I cannot wait to hug everyone in my church again. Like I cannot wait to just lose it and hug all the kids. And but are there any things that you're scared of for the church right now, or any things that you're excited to see what's going to happen?
Well, it's both. When it comes to technology, there's fears and there's also potentials. I mean, you have to live with both of those realms. When I went to Seattle, so Seattle was really the first major U.S. city to see a coronavirus outbreak, and it was confined, and they shut the city down. And it was eerie to drive around Seattle, at rush hour and see like 20 cars on the interstate in downtown Seattle. It was just crazy scary. But there's actually mega churches in the Pacific Northwest that are designed for virtual church normally. So you can download an app, and it's the entire church service is designed for the 1,000 people in the room and the 50,000 people who will never come into the room. So the argument is, those 50,000 people who will never go into church, you're reaching them. So there's always been this implied understanding that, especially in the Pacific Northwest, is where you have a lot of, it's like post-Christian, secular, so very dominant secular culture, is that people aren't going to go to a physical church building. So if you give them virtual church, they'll at least do that. And so I think there's a lot of smaller churches that, are embodied. They gather every week, who are now doing virtual church for week 4 or 5 now, I think. They're fearful that the virtual church model will actually take away from their churches. That people will be habituated to it and start to say like, oh, let's just do this on Sundays. And so because there's already apps and stuff for churches in the Pacific Northwest doing this, I think there's a real fear there that this will become the new norm for people. I don't think that's necessarily true like in my city. I think people will eventually go back to their normal routine of gathering on Sunday mornings. But I can see the real fear in other cultures where people are just going to do virtual church from now on because they've gotten so used to it. There's huge potentials. Obviously, online we can share the gospel. We can talk to our friends. We can talk to our family members, remind them of what this season is about. It's about learning more about who God is, about our mortality, our finitude, coming to really understand that. So there's huge possibilities in social media. And again, because there's so little going on other than Corona news. There's no sports. There's very little movie news. There's very little drama going on beyond, what's happening with the virus. People are online looking for content. And if you have something to share, if you have a video where you want to share your testimony, if you want to talk to your family members about the gospel using your iPhone, whether it's text, whether it's audio, whether it's video, you can do that in a way right now. You have all the tools to do that. And so there's huge possibilities now for doing ministry online. I've gotten so many emails from friends who want to start a podcast now. They're going to use this break because now they can do podcast. They've always wanted to do podcasting and now they're stuck at home. And so there's new possibilities that we didn't have a month ago in the United States. And so it's always a pro-con. You're always wrestling with this, what are the negative consequences of our technology and what are the possibilities of our technologies? And so we're always navigating this. Should we do it or should we not do it? We don't just do technology because the technologies are available. That's a very dangerous trap. We don't just upgrade our smartphones because we want the latest version. We have to think through, like, when do I need to upgrade? How much do I need to? So we're always like regulating on what we buy, what we use, based upon what we think is beneficial and helpful to our callings. And that's, I think, if there's anything that I've come away with when I talk about smartphones, is that we really have to re-understand and re-grasp what it is God has called us to do. Because a lot of people are trying to find healthy patterns with media, but they haven't wrestled with this question of what has God called me to do. And if you come to clarity on that, then okay, here's where my smartphone, here's where Facebook, here's where all of these digital media fit into what God has called me to do. And when we live from a lack of calling, we just import all sorts of media into our lives because we don't know what limits we should have, because we don't know what we're here for. We don't know what God has called us to do. We don't know how to serve others, love others. And so a lot of this comes back to calling, getting clarity on what has God called me to do, and then where does media fit into that calling. And when you lack any level of clarity on that question, it's going to be really hard to tame your digital appetites.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't remember which book this was in. It may have been in yours. It may have been, is it Carl Newport who wrote
Yep.
It may have been in his church, his book, Deep Work, or one of his other books that I read. But he was talking, someone was writing about the Amish and their view of technology, that, this idea that we have of the Amish, that they refuse any kind of technology, is actually not true. They vet the technology to determine, is this going to give us the end result? Is it worth, taking this in? If it, is it going to harm our community with one another? Is it going to harm our love for one another? And as much as there is wrong stuff going on at the Amish, with the Amish culture and maybe the theology and stuff, I haven't looked into it. That I think is something good that we can take out of that, to be looking at technologies, saying, okay, how can we use this well? And I'm still thinking through that, actually, and wondering, like, okay, how is it? Is it better to communicate with people on a mass scale, like a Facebook post, or is it better to call them one-on-one?
Yep.
Sort of Richard Baxter Reformed pastor style.
Yeah, hardcore.
Except not walking around. And I felt so horrible after reading that book.
Everybody feels horrible after reading that book. Yeah.
Yeah. No one read that book. Okay. So it's like, what should we be doing? And man, it's like, man, this is a great platform, but it's also, man, it's got responsibility that comes with it. Yeah, it's just an
Yeah,
interesting time to be alive.
anytime I mention the Amish, people laugh. Like I'll mention the speaking of the Amish, and like they'll start laughing. Like they have
Let
nothing
the
to say
podcaster
technologically.
talk about the Amish, guys.
Exactly. Theologically, I don't know where they're at theologically. I'm sure it's goofy. I'm sure that I would have tons of concerns, but they were early adopters on farming technology up until about the 1950s.
Yeah.
So if you look at how they adopted tractors and some things like that, it seems like they adopted very quickly. Then when it gets to the 1950s and 60s, they start to realize, okay, we're only going to adopt technologies that are good for community, good for the earth itself. And so, and also thinking through this question of what does it mean to live porously to God, right? Because the technological age promises you that you can be in complete control of you. If you want to change your gender, you can do it. If you want to do something to yourself, you can do it. If you want to biohack yourself with Crispr, kit that you order out of the mail, you can do that. You can have complete control over yourself. And so there's this veil of, it's a lie, but there's this veil of control over everything that I am and how I present myself on social media. I'm in complete control. And the Amish said, okay, that's a huge concern with technology of how do you remain porous to the providence of God while you live this life in wisdom. And that's one of the things that they're really wrestled with as a community is if you try to grab control over everything, at what point does God feel so distant because you're not porous to him? You're not listening to him. You're not hearing a virus, him speaking something to the world to wake up, and so you lose that porousness and you close yourself off from things like that. So that's very dangerous. So I think the Amish do have some things that we can learn from them, and there's no great books on their innovations and how they've rejected or resisted technological advance. So I would love to hear someone write a book on that. But God has implicitly put within humanity a tension within adoption of technologies. And that was, I think, very intentional from Babel. So he steps into the Tower of Babel and he squelches this tower city. And the way he does it is he confuses the language. Now, this tower city is probably halfway built, right? So you don't need the vernacular of Shakespeare to say, give me that block, put it here. You don't need to speak the same language to complete it. Probably what's going on is something far more complex, and that is that God created in a moment hundreds of different cultures. So different ways of speaking, yes, but also different ways of thinking about how do we build a house? What should a tower look like? What should a city look like? How should our roads go? And so you now have these competing visions of like, no, we were building my house this way, but I want to build my house this way. I want it to look like this. And you wanted a 1-lane road. I want a 3-lane road. And so like all of a sudden now you're not going to be able to build a city because there's competing understandings of what would make for a great city. So it's not just a change of vernacular. It's the proliferation of cultures. And I think we see that when it comes to technology. So facial recognition, cameras can biologically read the vectors of where your eyes and nose and mouth and ears are, and they can identify you like a fingerprint. Now, Delta Airlines here in the United States uses biometric boarding data, so you don't need a boarding pass. If you're on an international flight from the U.S. flying Delta, you don't have a boarding pass. You just step up to this camera, and you're on the plane. It's very quick. It's very easy. It speeds everything up. People love it, right? At the same time, so this is in the fall of 2019, at the exact same times in Hong Kong, there's dudes running around with face masks with cordless sawzalls chopping down the facial recognition camera towers that were in Hong Kong, right? And so you see what biometric data can do in a regime that uses it to coerce its people. And so what you have there, and I trace this back to Babel, you have different cultures viewing the same technology, one positively, one very negatively. And I think, this is my speculation, but I think God introduced those tensions within creation as a sort of help for us as we discover new things, as we discover new ways of doing technology. There's going to be inherent tensions and limitations because God multiplies all these cultures who view technology very differently. So it's not necessarily because they speak Cantonese, they hate biometric cameras, and because we speak English, we love them. it doesn't exactly break down that way, but I do think there are inherent tensions within the created order, within these cultures that God uses for our health. And so you have windowberries, and you have the Amish, and you also have Elon Musk, and you have these, let's colonize Mars, and like, let's not have computers, and they coexist on the planet. And I don't think as Christians we stand back and say, okay, well, who's right? I need to adopt one of these two options. I think it's that inherent tension comes out of Babel for our good. We need both of those. So we need a dreamer to say, let's go to Mars, and we need Wendell Berry to say, if you're not mowing your grass with a sickle, you're sinning. That's over pushing it, but there's a great documentary called Unnatural Selection on Netflix. If you have Netflix, Unnatural Selection, and one of the storylines is there's some geneticists who want to do away with I can't remember if it's rats in New Zealand, but they found this genetic code that if they release a few rats with this genetic modification, they can't reproduce. So eventually you just send these rats out, and they multiply, and eventually you get to this place where no rats can reproduce. And so everybody's like, oh, this sounds interesting, fascinating. Let's do this. Let's get rid of the rats. I think it was rats. Let's get rid of the rats. And then there's these like tribal spiritualists who like come to these city meetings, and they're like, no way are we letting you genetically modify the ecosystem of New Zealand like that. And so you have this clash of cultures between these like ancient spiritualist natives of New Zealand going toe to toe with these cutting edge, world renowned geneticists. And so the resistance to the genetic modification of New Zealand is coming from those spiritualists, those native tribes who are saying no. And so again, I look at that and I'm like, okay, I think God has put that tension into the created order between these tribes and the geneticists for a very good reason. And I don't want that tension to be lost. And so when it comes to how do we balance the tension? How do we balance Wendell Berry and Elon Musk? Who's right? I think God in his wisdom said, I'm going to put a bunch of Elon Musks and a bunch of Wendell Berrys on the same planet at the same time, and let them duke it out, and let that tension be a place where there's going to be so much resistance that adoption to technology won't really come about until there's some world order that comes out in the future. And I think if you trace out Babylon and what happens with Babylon in the book of Revelation, I think there is a coming together, a reconstruction of Babel. I mean, Babylon, it's the same city. I mean, the reason why it sounds the same is because Babel's on until it's Babylon. So there is a coming global order in which technology will be so quickly adopted and so universally adopted that it'll have to just be smashed supernaturally by God. But until that point, we live with the Elon Musk, Wendell Berry tension, and I think that's good. I think that's really,
but
really
it's
healthy.
Also for technology to be adopted really fast, man, this is like the perfect storm of something like this, where a government can do amazing things if they get control, but it can also be, like this temporary control extends indefinitely, and all of a sudden life has changed from now on. And I'm just thinking, man, the consequences, like, it's almost that we don't learn from our consequences. When you're talking about New Zealand, I'm thinking about the neighbor, Australia, right? And them introducing non-local animals to the landscape there, and then decimating the existing ecosystem there, and then having to introduce another animal that's going to hunt them down to try to fix that. But then they become the problem, and now you've got people who are paid to fly on helicopters to shoot animals to try to keep other animals, and I'm just thinking, man, it's like there at least we have like, okay, this is growing problem that we can try to limit. But if you do something like kill all the rats in the country, possibly, if this gets out to the world, and you have no way of reversing that, or stuff like CRISPR just is crazy to me, that you would genetically modify you have no idea what that's going to mean 10 generations from now. If you pass down your genetically modified genes, and it might work out for you, but not so much for your grandchildren. So it's a crazy time to be alive.
It is.
But like you see this technology, like our knowledge of the atom, and it can be used to power cities or destroy them. You see something like, well, like the cameras, right? They can be used by dictators to squash their people,
Yep.
or they can be used to make flights safer and easier,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So what would your message be to a Christian who wants to use technology well right now? Like, technology may be too broad, but let's limit it down to social media, and what can they do in this scenario to reach their friends, to some nuggets of wisdom, maybe a stone in their shoe that may bother them and get them chewing on something.
Good. Let me make a point just about our previous conversation. What we're talking about here is that the futility, the fall of the creation, always is in play here. So there's always going to be, we're going to take technologies and we're going to go too far, and we're going to have to back off of them. We're going to use technologies. We're going to find out they cause cancer. We're going to have to back off of them. We're going to use technologies. We're going to find out that's not healthy to the earth, and we're stewards of the earth. So we back off. And so I think that's part of the dynamic in play of what God has made accessible and possible to us, is we can always take our technologies and go too far. And then by taking them too far, we come back to a place that's healthy. And I think that's a natural rhythm of all technology. We go to extremes, and then we have to pull it back. And so we're always in this dialogue with creation. And that's, I think it's Isaiah 28, where it talks about the farmer. Where did the farmer learn all of his techniques? Well, he learned it directly from the Creator by experimenting with the creation. And so we're always experimenting with the creation, and as we experiment, we're listening to the voice of the Creator. He's speaking in all technologies, and that's true of genetics, that's true of agriculture, and so that's phenomenal. As far as what can people do to use to redeem technology for good? Again, I think it's number one, getting really clear on what your calling is. God has called you to love Him, to love Christ above all things. Number one, that's all of our callings. God creates humans because He wants us to delight in Jesus above all things. Then the second thing that He has called us to is to, out of that love and joy that we have for Christ and His redemptive love towards us by dying on the cross, bearing the wrath of God on our behalf, being raised from the dead so that our virus-prone bodies can be raised up and live eternally. Out of that joy, then we live towards taking the joy of Christ that we have and sharing it with our neighbor, sharing it with our family, sharing it with our friends, so that they can see God in our lives. That's what it means to be an image bearer. God is reflected through us. People look at our lives and they see God. They see the Creator in us. And so once you start getting clear on those two things, and that's, people ask Jesus, what does it mean to live? That's it. Treasure Christ above all things. Love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that's life. That's your calling. Now, your vocation fits under that. If you're a stay-at-home mom, that fits under that. If you're a missionary, that fits under that. Like that loving others fits everything else in our lives. But so getting clear on what is my purpose, and then once you have that calling, like, oh, I'm here to share the gospel, to love other people, then you engage in mission. You can do that on Facebook. You can do that in direct messages, text messages. I like your approach. You're very much like a one-on-one kind of guy. Like you do the media, you do the podcast, the vlogs and things like that. But you seem to be a guy that's really very much wired to do one-on-one conversation. And so you've merged those two. You know how to do both of those things. And so I think all of us can grow in that, knowing how to, what do I put on Twitter, and then what do I text? So doing that one-on-one thing, but also doing more community-based outreach. And so a lot of it is testimony, like, what is God teaching you in this season about your finitude, about humbling you, about breaking your love of entertainment or your love of wealth or your love of security? Maybe vocation has become your identity, and now that's shaken. And your identity is no longer in your work. It's no longer in your money. It's no longer in your possessions. Like, as you feel those things, I mean, when we're honest with what God is doing inside of us, that resonates with other people. And so if we're willing and open to share what God's doing within us, that really has a lot of traction on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter and Snapchat and TikTok. I'm sure there's ways to do it in TikTok. I don't know that platform really well, but what is God teaching you in this season? And how can you minister to others? I mean, God tells us in His Word, in our affliction, God comforts us so that we can comfort others. Okay, so as we're being comforted, we're being trained to comfort other people. So what is it that you think other people need to hear? And so there's huge opportunities, whether you're a spoken word artist or a painter or a poet or a woodworker or whatever it is, man. You can incorporate all of your hobbies, all of your gifts and skills into using that to magnify God.
Yeah, I think as well, going back to this, entertained versus satisfied thing with, removing the eternal component and just thinking about, okay, we were created for community. We got a lot of people, I think last week we had 4% of our population in quarantine. I think one of the things I've noticed as well is, especially if you've got families as a Christian, to be able to call someone who doesn't have a family, because we were in quarantine for 2 weeks and it was just full days trying to take care of 3 children and love your wife and still be in contact with people. But man, there are people who don't have families, who live alone and who have to sit in their bedroom, and they may be entertained, but there's a component missing of being able to communicate with someone one-on-one and not just read a status. And so like, yep. I've been encouraging some of our people, just like, hey, is there someone you need to be praying for? That one person who may not have a lot of family or friends around to contact them and may be entertained, but he needs someone to talk to. And would you be willing to pick up a phone and call them? It's so funny how expectations shift. I mean, like back in the day, when I was little, it was normal if someone came up to your door and knocked on it without being announced and just said, hey, you want to come out and play? And then all of a sudden you had to call before going to the door. And now you got to text almost before calling. And it's like, so having someone just call you out of the blue and be like, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
It might mean a lot for a person who's lonely. And
absolutely. I feel for my extroverted friends because I am so introverted, man. I feel zero dis-ease about being at home for this long. It's crazy, but I have a lot of friends who are just stir crazy and got to get out. And so, yeah, I mean, we're all wired so differently, and we, I laugh that self-quarantine is something I've trained for my whole life. It's just like, I'm sure there's an Enneagram. I don't know what my Enneagram number is, but whatever the one is, it's like fine to be at home and write books. That's the one I am. But not all my kids are wired that way. So, yeah.
Man, God bless you as you try to father your children well.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Train them the ways of the introvert.
Yeah.
And show them the light. Right?
Exactly.
Man, I don't want to keep you too long. We've been talking for like an hour now.
Has it been an hour?
Enjoyed it.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to do this in person in Reykjavik, in Iceland sometime. And I'm making every excuse possible to get there. So it won't be long, Lord willing.
Man, I would just recommend people follow him on social media, Tony Reinke or Reinke.
It depends if you're in Germany, it's Reinke. So you got to like swing your arm. Reinke. But you got to swing your arm. You can't do it in a car. You can't even pronounce my name in a car because you got to swing your arm as you say Reinke.
Yeah.
But you can say Reinke, whatever.
I would just want
answer
people
to all of it.
Follow him. Just be prepared to be convicted. I always pat myself on the back. I just shared an amazing meme, and surely enough, Tony Reinke is there on Facebook with some super
Bringing
insightful
shame, just
200-year-old book.
Spreading shame. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great time to read. Great time to read old books about the attributes of God. I'm reading Stephen Charnock's The Existence and Attributes of God by Stephen Charnock. Oh man, that's so good. So good. It's thick. It's a big, heavy book, but man, just dwelling on who God is and what he promises to be for us, man. The Bible is just so abundantly clear that God is so many things for us, and just dwelling in his character has been wonderful in the last month for me. And these are crazy times. Crazy times, especially if you feel your identity is wrapped up in like what you produce or your usefulness or your functionality. These are times just like I'm here to be a creature before my God. I'm not a wild creature, and I'm not an angel. he made me somewhere in the middle. I'm like, I'm not part beast and part angel. I'm a human. Like, and what does that mean to be human? It means I'm susceptible to disease. I'm frail. I'm weak. I must be resurrected. And it's a humbling season for sure, but it's a good one. And God is doing eternal things in our lives, things that we may understand more clearly in the future. But he is working in lots of lives, and he's given us huge opportunities as Christians to reach out to those who need gospel grace, who have fed their lives on the security of the world, on money, on entertainment, and now they're in a season where they're primed for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I pray all the viewers out there will just heed the Spirit and listen to what God has called you to do and to be and to minister in this season. And I cannot wait to be embodied in the flesh in Iceland one day, looking at the majestic waterfalls in the Northeast and the Blue Lagoon. Is that what it's called? The Blue Lagoon?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait, man. I can't wait to see all these things.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, now we're looking at a volcano going off right next to the airport. So we'll see.
Nice.
Like 15 kilometers away from the airport is a volcano. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like imminently, like within the next year, or like in the next million years it's going to blow. Oh, really? You feel it?
And we don't feel it. I mean, the airport is 40 minutes from here.
Okay, so you don't feel those rumbles.
I felt one the other day. I see it mostly. I see it when like this.
Street signs and stuff.
Yeah. But I almost never feel them. Last one I felt was 7.6 when I was like 13. That one I definitely felt.
Dang, was that a volcano or was that an earthquake?
It's just an earthquake.
Just an earthquake.
Yeah.
I can handle just an earthquake.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens, man. This we can't make any plans.
What in the world?
Trump banned me from your country. And,
really? You guys can't get into the U.S. now? I think global travel is going to be messed up for a long time, especially as the coronavirus now spreads out to more developing nations. I think international travel is just going to be a mess for a year plus.
Yeah, I think so too. We're trying to keep our one airline. I think they fired 1,000 employees or something like that.
So where can you guys fly to? Can you fly to Europe?
I don't really know. I don't think anyone.
Where can you fly from Iceland? Is it possible to fly anywhere? Can you get to Norway?
Faroe Islands, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
Do you know what the Faroe Islands are?
Yeah, the polar bears and stuff. Oh, yeah, that's like way up north, Norway, right?
No.
Is it what islands south. Is that?
Faroe Islands is like 50,000 people.
Oh no.
It's very similar to Iceland. You should follow that. That's like you never see it on a map. It's too tiny. It's got 50,000 in population.
What's the country?
Faroe Islands. Oh, it may be a part of Denmark. I don't know. If so, we need to pray for them because the Danish are not good. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh wow. Okay.
Everyone jokes on the Danish.
Oh, part of Denmark. Yeah. Oh, I see. So southeast of Iceland. Yeah. I was thinking of Bear Island, way north of Norway. Yeah, no, something else. Faroe Islands. Okay, so you can get to Faroe Islands if you wanted to, huh?
I guess so. No, actually, I do remember now a news article that said we weren't welcome anymore. So
where is Iceland Air flying to from Reykjavik right now?
It's a sightseeing company right now.
It just flies around.
That's what I would do. It's like, okay, let's not joke. We're not going anywhere.
Everybody sits on the left side of the plane, and it just circles around the island. Or maybe you can do a figure eight. You can have people on both sides, figure eight it, and then fly around. Because all the cool waterfalls are in the northeast, right? Northeast, like the huge ones.
Ooh, the huge ones. Oh, actually, you remember the one I posted on like last summer or something? It goes kind of like one after another. Like it just keeps going.
Yeah.
That one's up in the West Fjords, so northwest.
Yeah. Dettifoss.
I like the southeast. Yeah.
Oh, really? Dettifoss. Isn't that the biggest? That's the biggest waterfall in the country, right?
It may be.
Like volume of water
'Cause
wise. I've seen videos and it is
it's-
deafening. Like the sound is just, it's just pure noise. It's insane.
Yeah. Because I think, well, no, it wasn't Dettifoss. Dettifoss is southeast. But I remember this waterfall, or whatever the name was, up in West Fjords. I was like, it didn't look too far away.
Yeah.
But then I realized halfway up there, it's just huge. And so it, like, because we've got a child that's got special needs and he has to be held. And we had 2 other children with us.
Oh,
We didn't
man.
realize it was like an hour hike up to the waterfall. And then, yeah, it was chaos.
Good cardio.
So,
All
yeah.
right.
All right, man. It was awesome talking with you. Man, I can't wait to do this in person.
Yeah, me too.
Whenever in the next decade. Um,
Yeah.
But thank you for taking the time and having this discussion.
All right, brother. I appreciate it.
All right.
Bye-bye.